Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Bowles with Empowered by Nikki, and here with me today I have Maddie Andrews, and I just want her to kind of just give her story, her background, and just some things to help us get through like first step with any obstacles and perseverance and just different things that we just like as a community that we want to share with others to help them if they're in a tough spot or if they have barriers or anything that could potentially be something that we can help you get past. So here with me is Maddie Andrews again. So I wanted to just give her a little shout out there. So Maddie, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
So much for having me. So today I am an MSW student, mental health advocate, nonprofit founder, peer support specialist, but it really wasn't always that way. So I started having mental health symptoms after a traumatic experience when I was 4. Um, I reached out for help, but was kind of shut down. And then when I was in middle school, I started developing more significant symptoms such as paranoia, delusions, mood swings. And because of that initial shutdown from when I was 4 years old, I hid it. And it also had a lot to do with the fact that when you're in middle school, you assume everybody's kind of the same. You only know what you know. So I didn't really understand that other people didn't have these symptoms as well. It wasn't until I was 14 that I got my initial diagnosis, and that happened because I read a magazine article about a young woman with OCD, and it really resonated with me. Um, so I got that diagnosis, but I really wasn't disclosing the more severe symptoms. And that really didn't happen until I was 19. I came to my mother after having to drop out of college because of my mental health. I was having suicidal ideation, psychosis, self harming, mania episode. And when I dropped out of college, I told her, I said, I want to end my life. And she got me to a hospital where I received the diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder. And it really was this grief process, right? Because I went 19 years thinking, okay, this is my life. These are my goals. This is how it's going to go. And all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, it changed. And I was given medication and new resources and new barriers. And it was really hard. It was very difficult. And I really didn't have a solid path until I was 23. I had been in drug treatment once. I had been in the mental hospital 4 times, and it was very tumultuous. And at that point, I decided to get back into school, and it was successful. I had mastered wearing this mask in public, right? So the society in general didn't know what my struggles. But when I got home, I was so drained from pretending and putting on this act all day that my moods were all over the place, or I truly had nothing left to give. And when I entered my career, I continued this, but my personal life really went into shambles. I was married, but unable to give my husband anything because of the medication. I couldn't process emotions. I was very numb. I was 420 pounds, very suicidal. And I really continued this pattern. And then in my early 30s, I learned that unbeknownst to me, my diagnosis had been changed to what's called schizoaffective bipolar type. And what that means is I have symptoms of both schizophrenia disorder and bipolar disorder. So that was another grief process, right? Because I was so terrified of the word schizophrenia. I had this misconception that people with schizophrenia don't live fulfilling lives and are dangerous, all the things you see in the media, which could not be farther from the truth. And so, again, that grief process, that understanding who I am, and still unable to process emotions, still unable to feel motivated, still unable to enjoy life until 2023. I was on about 10 to 15 medications, and my doctor called, and I was like, what's one more? I'll try it. And this difference with this medication is it doesn't block all your dopamine. So your receptors are more open. So I began to feel happy. I began to feel sad. Like, for example, when my mother died by suicide, I couldn't even cry. I was so numb to the world and so numb to my own emotions. But suddenly I started processing things, and it felt like I was a newborn. Like I had to get therapy to relearn how to process emotions. And I was doing really well, so well that my doctor reduced my other medications. But when you live with schizoaffective bipolar type, you have to treat mania, depression, and psychosis. Well, she took away my mania medication, and what I didn't realize initially was I was becoming manic. I was entering a manic state, and I didn't realize it for about 4 months. And by the time I realized that not only was I manic, but I was in a severe psychotic state. And I understood this was unsafe. This was dangerous. I was being impulsive. I was having severe hallucinations, paranoia, delusions. So I advocated for the first time in my life and I said, I cannot work. I need to get better. I need help. And she said, okay, for the first time. And I was written out of work, but not only was I written out of work, my husband was written out of work because at this point I could not care for myself. So I practically became bedridden and spent my days hallucinating. The first course of treatment was sedatives, but when you live with substance abuse history, that's a dangerous path to take. So I did relapse. And when that didn't work, she increased a medication called lithium. Lithium is a heavy metal frequently used to treat bipolar disorder. And part of lithium treatment is continuous blood work. They have to check your kidneys, your liver, your levels of the medication. And she didn't do that. And pretty quickly, I couldn't talk. I couldn't swallow. I was in diapers. It was bad. I was stuck in the bed, unable to do anything. And nobody did anything about it. Like my doctors would see me and just tell me to rest. And my husband had no education on this and had no idea what was happening. So he just went through the motions. And our marriage was really going through a difficult time because of my mental health and his role reversal taking care of me. So I really didn't have any support. Um, and then one day I got enough strength to try to say, take me to the hospital. I knew something was wrong. And he did, and he took me to a mental hospital. And they quickly told me when I couldn't even sign my name to sign myself in that this was bigger than what they can handle. And they called an ambulance. The ambulance never came. So my husband rushed me to the hospital where it was discovered that I was dying. I had extreme lithium toxicity. And the first course of action they decided through poison control was to flush me through a fluid. That's what you do when you're poisoned. So they started IV fluids. I was combative. I was restrained to a bed alone. It was very scary. I was severely hallucinating, had no idea where I was. They were convinced that I had done this to myself when I hadn't, but I couldn't talk, so I couldn't tell them any differently. And they continued the fluids until my heart enlarged and started to fail. And when your heart enlarges and starts to fail, it pushes into your lungs. And then it caused parts of my lungs to collapse. And then poison control said, okay, let's try dialysis. So I ended up with 2 rounds of dialysis to clear the lithium, but then there was another problem. Maybe I wasn't going to die, but I wasn't responsive. So they did an EEG, which showed little to no brain activity, and silent syndrome was discussed, which means I was going to regress and possibly need to be in assisted living for the rest of my life. And I spent 2 weeks like this in the ICU until one day I woke up and I tried to talk and I had no memory. I had no idea what had happened to me, but I started trying to ask questions. And that day they transferred me to a different hospital and I couldn't write my name. I couldn't do anything. PT was working with me on how to walk. I didn't know what a toilet was. So they didn't understand how little I didn't understand. Like nobody was understanding that I had a brain injury. So when I was there, I really started to rehab myself. They gave me pen and paper and I practiced every day. How do I write my name? How do I write my name? And I got to the point where I could write my name. And they had written down phone numbers for me there because you can't have a cell phone. And I practiced reading and inputting in the landline, reading and inputting until I could dial a phone. And when I came home, physically, I was at an all-time low. I was so sure this is what death was, and I just begged to end the pain. But when that didn't happen, one day when I learned to read again, I was like, maybe I need to know what happened to me. So I read my medical records and I learned what I had been through. I read all of them. And a fire burned in my belly and I said, this is it. I'm not gonna die. I spent so many years of my life feeling like that was the only option until today. So I got on the phone, and even though I couldn't talk normally, I begged for help. And I found a new team of doctors and a day program. And when I went to these places, when I learned to drive again, I took the skills they taught me and brought them home with me. And I made my whole life a healing experience. The doctors had predicted it would take me years to recover, but I was back at work 3 months later. I healed at an exceptional, at a huge rate. And during that process, I really reflected, why was I coached to be silent about who I am my whole life? And why is it I'm having to drive an hour to get any of these services? Why is my area a mental health desert? So I set out to change this. I started talking to anybody who would listen to me and sharing my story and sharing the importance of mental health education. And then 4 months after coming home, I started a nonprofit called J&E Support Group with the mission of mental health awareness, education, and community support. And not 9 months after, 8 months after coming home, I got into grad school in the top four social work program in the country to get my MSW because I want to be a voice of bigger change. My initial idea was grant-based therapy, but today I'm much more interested in advocacy. So my dream is a world where mental health services are equitable, affordable, and accessible for all.
That's pretty incredible. And I think that like a lot of people, like especially when they are going through the mental health issues, it's like beyond like just like they're scared to like ask for help or they're nervous to ask for help. But when you do ask for help and you get shut down, or like they're like, oh, like and like kind of blow you off and say like, oh, go home and rest, like you said, like or like go home and do this and that. Um, that's obviously like very off-putting, and then that like pushes them back even farther. And like a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the medications that they give people for mental health issues, you like become a zombie. Like it's like you're like you don't have like you can like go through your day, but you have no like e-regulations or regulations. Like I don't know like how to like kind of like put that into words, but um like you don't have the ups and downs or like the plateaus that everyone does throughout the day. It's like just literally like a steady just feeling throughout the whole day. And it is like your mind is clouded and you don't know and you can't express or feel your emotions at all. And like, that's why a lot of people are like, oh no, I'm feeling fine and stop their medications or, because a lot of the times they don't like that feeling. And like, I know like I have anxiety induced depression and I've been at some pretty low points, but when my daughter had her first surgery, she had a spinal surgery last year. I went to my doctor and I was like, like I have been doing very good. Like, my mental health's awesome. I've been doing great, but I know I'm not going to be able to get through this like without like being emotional while she's like going to be like getting put back. And so I was like, like I know we can't be on Xanax forever, whatever. But I was like, if I can get a couple Xanax just to get me through the surgery day and her post-op, I was like, that would be great. That would be so awesome. And so my doctor ended up giving me the couple of Xanax to get me through that. But a lot of people just don't realize that it is okay to go and ask for the help or ask and let them know, that it needs to be done or something needs to be done. And you do know your own body. So I'm super proud of you for going through all of that and just, taking the next steps that you needed to take because a lot of people don't do that. And a lot of people need to know that, it is possible and you can advocate for yourself. And, especially for mental health, medications don't work for everyone. And there are side effects and there are different things. And, if your body doesn't feel right, like, let someone know. Um, because if you don't, then we have like other complications and other issues, and people do end up in the hospital or they do end up committing suicide, or attempts or just different things like that. And I know a lot of the times, things are triggered, especially with mental health, like something could trigger it. And then, you just hit rock bottom and you're there for a while. And yeah, I guess, do you have any advice for someone that is going through what you went through? Yeah, on what they can do.
I think the biggest piece is that self advocacy is so important. We, like you said, we know our bodies best. We know what a side effect is happening. And I've had doctors who don't listen to me and it almost killed me. And I've had doctors now who do listen to me and I'm able to be in recovery. So express your needs. If you don't like your treatment, express that. And if you don't like your provider, change. There's no shame in that. And there's definitely no shame in asking for help. You know, we're all human beings and mental health affects millions of people. And there shouldn't be a stigma attached to wanting to better our lives.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think that it's pretty incredible, like your journey and like everything you went through and that you've like persevered through them because, just um addiction and mental health and like when they especially when they play like a role together and a lot of the times like the medications that people are put on, it puts them in that situation.
Definitely.
Um and yeah, it's a pretty just all over the board. We're society's getting a little bit better on
A little bit.
yeah, small amount, but a little bit. They're getting a little bit better on like understanding if like people are like needing a minute, or like needing to take a break. Um,
I
but
think
definitely not at the point to where like people are accepted, especially, in the workplace or out in public, or like, if you just are just too overwhelmed or um, like just like sensory overload, just with daily life. It happens to everyone.
so often you hear people say when they die by suicide, "Oh, I wish they would have talked to me." But what are we doing to the people in our day-to-day lives when they do talk to us, when they are going through a hard time? Are we being empathetic and positive and kind and listening? Or are we being negative or discounting or telling them to get over it? Like, we need to look at the day to day of how we're treating people and make sure we meet people with kindness so that we don't get into a situation where we regret not listening to them.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy shift that we're getting into like with the world. And I know that there's been a lot of um obviously like social media and just different things like that. People do get the hate comments and just hate and like bashing and things like that when people do try to like, say something on Facebook or they post to Instagram or TikTok reel or whatever the case may be. And they are at their lowest point, or they like, and they try to do something to like either lift themselves up or they're just trying to share that they are at their low point and, like I just need some positive words or something. And then they like there's always like still people bashing them or like still people like going against them, and it's like you know they just don't feel accepted or heard even when they are asking and reaching out to people. um and so like people just get discouraged, and like my one thing is like just keep going to different people until you find the right people that are will be there for you. I think that that's another big thing is having that community or like, because it does take a village, and that's with ourselves too. Um,
It does take a
it's
village, and I think you're right finding those right people. And social media can be a scary place for people with mental illness. Like, there's definitely a great community on there. Like, I have support groups on there, and I love it. It's a beautiful thing. I connect with people I wouldn't be able to connect with otherwise. But there's definitely the flip side of people feeling safe saying negative comments when they don't know you. But words have power, and we need to remember that.
right. It definitely does. Um, and then can you share your nonprofit again and where people can find you?
Definitely. So J&E Support Group is a nonprofit. We offer speaking engagements and free support groups to our community. We have two in person where I live and one virtual. Our virtual is for anyone living with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or bipolar disorder. Um, all of those resources, I find it to be important to make them equitable, accessible, and affordable. And to me, that means free. I personally feel like mental health care is way too expensive. We don't want to have to use these resources. It's a necessary tool, so I'm not going to make them expensive. Um, and you can find us at www.jesupport.org. We welcome anyone with a like-minded mission, even if you just want to chit chat. We're here for you. Um, we love our community, and we just want to help everybody heal and grow.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maddie. Is there anything else that you would like to add in before we get off here?
I appreciate you having me, and I want to just leave a message for anybody living with mental illness to know it's not a death sentence, and recovery or hope are very real. We can recover, we will recover. Sometimes it takes a significant period of time, but please don't give up. You've got this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know
Yeah,
it's definitely not an easy story to share. And like, when we do share our stories, we relive it again and again and again. Um, and so thank you so much for sharing your story. And I know
definitely. Thank you
that,
for having me.
yeah, yeah, you're welcome. I think that it'll be very impactful for those that are hearing it and those that are in the same scenario or situations, or if they have family members. So hopefully we can get the word out and make sure that people know that there is support groups and people there just like them, and we're all here to help each other.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.